This edition of Mac Voices is brought to you by Squarespace. Everything you need to create an exceptional website. For a free trial and 10% off your first purchase on new accounts, go to squarespace.com/MacVoices and use the discount code MacVoices12. That's MacVoices12. Welcome to Mac Notables on Mac Voices. This is the Talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, it's been a while since we've talked to Chris Breen, and it seems like it's just about time, especially on the topic of music. Chris, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks a lot, Chuck.
Yeah, what have you been up to, Chris? Not much, really. Let's see. Macworld podcast.
Yeah, and I've been doing some lynda.com stuff. So, yeah, I get up in the morning, I come down here to the office, and I just start banging away on stuff. And then at the end of the day, I collapse, and then I do it again the next day.
I'm always impressed by the quantity and the quality of what you put out. I read the things regularly on Macworld. Obviously, like everyone else, some apply to me, some don't. But sometimes I look at it and say, how did you figure that out? Where did that come from? Especially the Mac 911 stuff.
Sometimes it's questions that come in from readers, people who have no idea how to do something, and it's something I hadn't thought about, and go, oh, that sounds like it would be a good question that would relate to lots of people. Other times, I have to admit, there are occasionally fake names in there, and there are problems that I have or my wife has, and she comes down and says, I don't know how to do this, and again, it's another good source of material. So it really is the kind of thing that typical Mac users face, and I see if I can come up with a solution for them.
Yeah, well, they're always, I mean, every one I've ever tried has worked, and happily I haven't had to try that many, but it's nice to have as a resource. And folks, I'd tell you to go to the Mac 911 column and check it out. There are a lot of little nuggets of information in there that a problem you may not even really have realized that is there is annoying you, and Chris has already found the answer.
Oh, so, excellent. Thanks, Chuck.
So, Chris, we're going to do something a little bit different. You and I usually joust a little bit about music in a very good-natured way. But I read a quote a little while ago that really stuck with me, and I wanted to discuss it with someone, and you seem to be the perfect guy because you're iTunes, you're a musician, you have some strong opinions on the streaming services and all. So let me read you the quote, and this is from KK Downing, who is one of the original twin lead guitarists for Judas Priest. Now, I know Chris and I could go back and forth on that. But KK is retiring, and his quote was, if the industry was still healthy and people still had to spend their hard-earned money buying a record, it would be different. We used to buy an album and think that, well, it's not that good, but I'll play it 1,000,000 times and I'm sure I'll get into it. Now it doesn't get a second chance. Chris, do you think that's true? And I'll take it in the way that I started to think about it, but I want to get your initial reaction to that.
I think that's a viewpoint of somebody of that age, and I am kind of that age. I think I'm a little younger than this person, but not a lot. At one time, we were very album-oriented, and I recall going out and getting one of the later Stones albums, and all the reviews came in. These were all printed at the time because there was no internet, and people would say, yeah, you really have to listen to this album about 15 times before it sinks in, and then you'll realize what a great album it is. And I think there's some truth to that. I think this was in reference to Exile on Main Street, which turns out to be one of the great Stones albums of all time. Yeah. But on first listening, you could go through there and say, I'm not hearing a lot of Sympathy for the Devil in here, and I'm not hearing this, that, or the other hit. And do I really like this album? And really, honestly, it did take those 10 listenings to understand kind of what the Stones were going after, that this was something new. And sometimes it does take time to adjust your ears. I think that JJ's right in that a lot of times there is so much music out there and we have so many choices and it's so easy to get that you will listen to a track maybe half a time. If it doesn't hook you right away and you have the opportunity to get on to something else and you haven't paid for it, that it's streaming in some way, you may go, yeah, doesn't move me. I'm not interested. So I do think to an extent that people are listening in ways that they really want to be caught immediately. And if they're not going to be willing to take the time to work at it. And some music does take work, that it isn't necessarily an earworm or catchy. But if you dig into it and spend some time actively listening, you may find something in there that you didn't find before. On the other hand, I think the days of albums as works of art is not entirely gone, but they're certainly lessened than what they once were.
My reaction was similar to that, but I started going down all the paths I could go with it. First of all, the album comment, and you're right. Albums were albums, and now albums are convenient collections, but they really don't mean anything. But I almost took it down to the track level too, and thought, just what you said. There are plenty of tracks that the first time through were like, okay, I'd rather go listen to something I know, or I'll try something else. Listen to them a few times, and then you really get into them. And I guess I'm trying to decide whether something has been lost with the availability of music. iTunes sells things for 99 cents a track, basically, give or take. But the subscription services are a little different animal. The subscription services give you this huge library of music for around the cost of maybe one CD or less per month. And that's where I felt like this quote really hit home with me. It's like, okay, I listen to something, and you're right, half a track. That's not for me. I'll go and try something else and just keep on going and going. And I already have attention deficit syndrome. And this is just adding to it. And so, what does it mean for the musicians? I'll tell you another thing that I heard actually on Glenn Fleischman's show, The New Disruptors. And forgive me, Glenn, because I can't remember the artist you were talking to, but she was saying that the way she looks at it, she competes with every piece of media that has ever been produced. Not every piece of music, but every piece of media. And it's true. And it's like, okay, so where do we go with this? Is it truly too much?
Yeah, I think that it is, to the extent that, well, let me back up on a couple of things. One, I think that music for a lot of people is like comfort food. It's like the meatloaf or the mac and cheese of their existence, that you want to put on something that you like, that makes you feel a certain way. Music is very much, maybe more than any other art form, in that it really gets down to kind of the marrow bone of you, which is it elicits these responses, happiness or sadness or melancholy or something else that seems to tap into you more than, say, a painting would, or a dramatic work or a sculpture. So I do think that people tend to kind of push that button, much like the rats in a maze will go up and push the button to try to get some kind of stimulation. And music serves that purpose for some people. And so to ask people to go beyond that visceral reaction, but instead to go in and study and work at it, is something, as I said before, it was easier to do before because you had a financial commitment. You'd purchase this album for $13 or something. And so you sort of felt like, well, I want to get my money's worth out of it, so I'll keep playing it until something strikes a chord, or maybe it never does. And then in terms of the artist saying you're competing with everybody else, yeah, I think that's true. But I think when you're an artist, for some people, I think for the best artists and the truest form of being an artist is you don't care about what everybody else is doing. That this is your need to express yourself in some way, whether it's lyrically through what you have to say in the song, or if it's musically the arrangement of the chords and the notes and everything else you do. It doesn't really matter what everybody else is doing, except to the point that you want to be commercially successful. And I think that if people are only in this kind of business, or any artistic business, and all they're interested in is making money, I think their art is kind of shallow to begin with. It's simply a commercial enterprise rather than something that's soulful and that I think ultimately connects with your audience, because I think that's the best art, something that really means a lot to you, and hopefully you convey that to somebody else through your medium. So I'm not so worried about artists competing with other artists. Yes, of course, it gives you an incentive to be as good as you can be, but beyond that, you're going to make money on it or you're not going to make money on it. But if that's your whole purpose for being in it, maybe you're in the wrong business.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. But the subscription services, there's so much controversy, and frankly, I don't know who to believe anymore. Maybe you have some insight as to the financial fairness of this model to the artists. Let's forget about the service making money, but are the adequate artists being properly compensated? Adequately is a dangerous word. Maybe properly is too. But again, there's so much money out there. There's so many people out there. It's just a completely different model, and some of the artists seem to think it's great, and others seem to just detest it.
Well, I think they have good reason to. I think the illusion everybody grew up with was that I'm going to make it. I'm going to be a big star, and I'm going to have limousines, and I'm going to get this fabulous record contract, and I'm going to get a ton of money. Well, when you look at the artists who actually have done that, there are not a lot of them, because it turns out the contracts are kind of onerous, and that there are all kinds of clauses in there that you end up paying for your recording, and you're paying for this, you're paying for that, you're paying for everything else. And by the time those millions roll in, it turns out you actually owe millions as well in order to pay for what you've stocked up in trying to produce this art. Some people, of course, end up doing quite well, but it's a very small number of people who do. Now, I think if you talk to artists who are doing this, a lot of them have gone back to performing. In the old days, in the old days, that's how you did it. You performed. You went around the country, you went and played places, people paid you to play. Then, and I think it was probably with the advent of the Beatles when they stopped touring and just said, forget it, we're not going to do this anymore. And so they made their money as recording artists. And people got the ideas like, well, yeah, that's how we do it. We'll just make albums, and that's where all the money is going to come rolling in. I think that's starting to turn around again, where people realize that, particularly with things like subscription services where you're not making a lot of money per listen, you've got to go out on the road. And so now you're concertizing again, which I think is kind of nice for us as consumers, that we can actually see people making music again to the extent that they're actually doing it versus lip syncing it or getting some big extravaganza. And it's a big dance show more than anything else. But for some people, that's satisfying as well, to see a big name artist go up and lip sync and dance all over the stage and have 1,000 people on stage and fireworks, which is, that's a show too. As a musician, I don't think it's very gratifying, but I understand that other people might. So, yeah, they're not getting paid what they once were. I do think that rates have to come up. There was some number where Lady Gaga or something got like 1 million plays, and she made like $14 on it or something like that, which is completely unfair. So if we as consumers want to go beyond buying physical media or buying a download for 99 cents or $1.29 and really want to turn on the tap so that we can have access to everything, I do think that artists need to get more money out of it, which may mean that we have to pay more to have that kind of subscription service, instead of just saying, oh, great, I can listen to 1 trillion songs per month for $10. Maybe they're going to have to raise that so that the artists are making a better living out of it.
Yeah, I get worried that we are truly killing the artists, that the only people that are going to be left are the people that can afford to do it, or just so dedicated they just, in their soul, they need to produce music, or the kind of corporate concocted pop stars that, at least in my opinion, I think we see, they burn bright for 6 to 9 months and then they're replaced by somebody else. That is very unsatisfying, and you realize that in the older days, God, I just dated myself. But you found an artist you liked and you followed them, and sometimes you followed the careers of the individual musicians within a group when they split off or did other things. And now it's just like, okay, who's the flavor of the month, and who's making the biggest noise on Entertainment Tonight, which is really a sad way to measure it.
Well, I think it's always been the case, though. Those of us who've lived life for a while, I think we tend to look at the past with rose-colored glasses, like, well, the music of the 60s or the 70s or the 80s or the 90s or the aughts or whatever, whenever basically you were 16, was the best music ever. And since then, it's not as good. And we forget. I grew up listening to music in the 60s and 70s, and a lot of people think, oh, this was a golden era for music. Well, I remember listening to AM radio in those days, and there was a lot of crap on the radio too. Yes, the Beatles were making music, and the Stones were making, and Van Morrison was making music, and the Doors, this, that, and the other. Some great musicians were making music. But we didn't have as many cultural distractions then, so radio was a huge focus for a lot of us. But at the same time, there was the Archies, and there was the this, that, or the other AM pop hit that was up on the top 10. If you go back and look at the Billboard charts for the last 40 years and see what was number one each year, the top 10 of each year, you're going to find a lot of terrible music in there. Yeah. So, yes, we still have these instant stars that are created on entertainment shows, where you have contests to have people come up and they're stars for a couple of albums or maybe one album, and then they disappear because we're looking for the next flavor. But that's always been the case. We've always had teen idols and disposable music that was great, and then it was bad. As you could probably see behind me, I have a record collection here, around 12 to 1,500 albums. I am embarrassed every once in a while when I look through some of that stuff, because it was like, oh, I loved this when I was 17. But now if I put it on, and I do every once in a while just to give myself some perspective and realize, wow, this was not good. And I thought it was great then. So I'm not too concerned that the quality of music today is worse than it was, or that it's more prepackaged. It's just we have new ways of packaging that stuff and promoting stuff that's not very interesting, but gives people a thrill right now, and then a couple of years from now they'll be embarrassed that they ever liked it.
I guess that would be your reaction. I'm sure it's the reaction of a lot of people, and I'm sure that there's some music in the past that I've liked that I would have that reaction to. I guess I define music, along with a lot of art, as the thing that creates a feeling in me. Whether it's a good feeling, like you said earlier, a good feeling, a bad feeling, happy feeling, sad feeling, angry feeling, whatever. It creates an emotional response. And so, for that, I can go back and listen to some of the things I listened to as a kid and still get that same emotional response, and other things not. So, I don't know. Maybe I haven't. Maybe my musical tastes haven't diversified quite as much as maybe someone like you, who is a musician in his own right, and therefore probably views music differently than I do.
Well, maybe you still have the emotional maturity of a 15-year-old, and that's maybe what. No,
I knew we were going to go there.
No, because there are things that, as a teenager, for me, I thought were powerful and spoke to me as a teenager. Not just because of the message of it, but I liked much heavier music then than I do now. Or I liked, I was into prog rock for a while. And so I thought this stuff was so amazing because these artists played in different time signatures, and what they were doing is very, very technically difficult. And I still admire the technique that goes into it. But emotionally, I just think, well, this is just a mess of a piece of music. It was clearly like somebody was trying to show off their chops here, so they did this. Or certain albums that were really, really heavy. That was great when I was 17 and full of hormones going this, that, and the other direction. Now, as a more mature person with more complex emotions, I listen to it and I just go, yeah, no, not so much for me. And so when my daughter's coming up with certain kinds of music now, and I listen to it, and some of it I like and some of it I don't care for at all. But I understand it's appropriate for her age. And my hope is that when she gets to be older, she'll look back on some of this stuff and know what was the good stuff and what was sort of the stuff that was appropriate for her age at the time. So when I write about music for Macworld or somewhere else, I occasionally get these comments, where it's these people that firmly believe their music was the best music ever. And to me, it seems like, well, musically you haven't matured much, but I think that's the case with most people. I really think that John Lennon even talked about it when he said, the stuff that moves you when you're 15 is the stuff you strive for the rest of your life. And that was kind of his musical career. So if you look at his later stuff, he was going back to the Elvis stuff that he liked and the doo-wop kind of stuff that he liked. So I do think that's a natural tendency for people, is to go what originally resonated with you and then maybe find sort of offshoots as you get older. But I approach music more, and maybe it's because I'm a musician, but I look at more of a smorgasbord where I don't want to eat the same stuff all the time. I will go and listen to kinds of music that I don't normally listen to just to see what else is there and try to keep it fresh, instead of saying, no, this band I listened to when I was 16 is the only music ever, and it's the only thing worth listening to.
No, I agree completely. I think, I think you can go almost both directions. I think you can still have an appreciation for that. If it still, stomps on your accelerator, that's great. But there are other things out there that are just as good and maybe hit a different part of you. And so if you're not exploring a little bit, I feel like you are missing out. I agree with you.
Yeah, well, and so often people just don't bother to explore. I think that's it. They've made up their mind. They say, well, this is what worked for me, and it still works for me. Some people will listen to the same music they listened to 20 years ago and still get a lot of enjoyment out of it, and that's terrific. But at the same time, they say, well, there isn't anything out there that's any good now. And I think that's just simply that they haven't taken the time to find out. There'll be times when I will listen to a lot of old music, and I'm listening to old jazz now. Which I didn't grow up on, but now I'm getting an appreciation for it. And then I listen to some new sort of popular stuff, jazz, and I think, well, this really isn't as good as Miles Davis and these guys from back in the day. But if I explore a little bit further, I realize, no, there's some really good players out here who are doing some amazing stuff. And no, it doesn't sound like Miles, but it's still really, really good. So, but it takes work. And I think that's the issue for a lot of people is they want the comfort food. They don't want to try a new dish.
This edition of Mac Voices is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website or online portfolio. For a free trial and 10% off your first purchase, go to squarespace.com/MacVoices and use the discount code MacVoices12. That's MacVoices12. If you're in the market for a new website, you're looking around, trying to figure out who will give you the best value, how much you can cut costs, and how quickly you can get your new site up and online. There are a number of great hosting companies out there, and a whole lot of not-so-great options. The good ones and the bad ones both often offer one-click installs of some popular blogging software, e-commerce software, calendar software, and more. The trouble is that those hosts offer very limited, if any, support for all that software they brag about. They are in the business of running servers, not software support, and certainly not supporting your website. When something goes wrong, they point you to somewhere else and someone else, and good luck with getting the help you need. Squarespace is different. If you're a Mac user, and you are a Mac user, right, then you understand the benefits of one company making the hardware and the software. In Squarespace's case, they operate and maintain the hardware that is appropriate for their software and have their custom software running on it with full support. So they know what's working, what's not, and how to fix problems when they arise. When you contact Squarespace support, you are connecting with a crack team of professionals who have won industry awards for their service. They will get back to you quickly, often within an hour, to help resolve any issue you have. And they won't abandon you with a shoulder shrug when things get difficult. They stick with you until the issue is resolved. And that makes a huge difference, because your site is special. Whether it's just publishing your thoughts or selling your stuff, it needs to be up and online. And it will stay online no matter how much traffic your sudden fame drives to it. Squarespace has a secret sauce that allocates more resources to your site when it needs it, so you won't miss those opportunities at peak times. The odds are that you won't ever need to contact Squarespace support because their system and their hardware are so reliable and so user-friendly. But if you have a question or a crisis, they will be there. Count on it. To find out why you won't need to contact Squarespace support, I want you to go to squarespace.com and sign up for a free 14-day trial and build the site that you've been putting off. Find out just how easy and powerful Squarespace is. And when you've confirmed that, use the code MacVoices12 to take 10% off your first purchase. That's MacVoices12 to get 10% off your brand new Squarespace site. Squarespace, everything you need to create an exceptional website. Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this edition of Mac Voices. Well, let's use that as a segue into a discussion of two specific services, iTunes Radio, which has just relatively recently come on the scene, versus Pandora.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of anxious to hear your take on it, because I've noticed that with iTunes Radio, I get the feeling that the difference in these two are the difference in curation. iTunes Radio, as far as I know, and I believe it's been publicized, is human curated. That, there are people going through picking the playlists. Pandora is automated curation because of the Music Genome Project and the way they analyze music and package it together. And frankly, you probably can explain that a little better than I can. But I think the idea is that it goes into the piece of music and ranks it in by I forget how many different ways of looking at it: time signatures, instruments, overall sound, beat, all the things that I don't. And I honestly feel like sometimes I prefer the automated, because I feel like it does force me into a discovery of something else, instead of just saying, okay, I'm going to pick the metal channel and I'm going to get maybe new bands and maybe some stuff I like, but it's going to keep me there. Whereas if I don't even know who to pick, I can pick a Led Zeppelin channel on Pandora and suddenly I'll get this wacky, completely off the wall thing that has nothing to do with anything like Zeppelin, but I kind of like it.
Yeah. It's, they're kind of doing two things. iTunes is doing two things. They have the human curated playlists. So they call them channel, or they call them stations, but they're not really stations. What they are is somebody sat down and said, I'm going to make 50 track playlist on here, and we're going to stream that. So those are the ones that you see along the top of the iTunes Radio when you go in there. And those are handpicked by Apple, and they make sense. You listen to them and go, yeah, this totally makes sense. This fits whatever this theme is. Then they're also trying to do something like Pandora does, where you pick a root track and then it's supposed to play songs that are related to it, much like Pandora does. Pandora's been at this quite a long time, and their algorithms are amazing. They are so good that you can pick a root track and you're going to get something that is going to fit pretty well. And if you tune it where you're giving it the little thumbs up and thumbs down, it gets better and better. So I am very impressed with the technology that they've put together for this, but they've been at it a long time. iTunes came in, and they haven't been at this very long, and you can tell when you try to do one of these root tracks and then have it play stuff for you, it can be wildly off, to the point of being awful. I tested early on their classical selections, and I think I used J.S. Bach as a root artist, figuring, okay, they're going to hit the Baroque period. And this is a specific period within classical music of about 60 years. And you have Handel, and you have Bach, and you have Curation, and you have some other composers of that time. Well, the way iTunes Radio handled that was like, oh, you want the worst chestnuts of classical music ever. And so that's what it played. So it started with a really well-known Bach track, and then it gave me something from the classical era, which is, another 100 years later. And then there's something from the Romantic period, which is yet another 100 years later. I mean, it would be like lumping some death metal group in with Frank Sinatra, because they all recorded within 100 years of each other. But it was that broad, and it was that bad. So you could go in and say, no, don't do that, and you could try to tune it, and the tuning didn't work very well. Plus, there were a lot of repetitions, so it played 3 versions of this same solo cello piece, but there was all by different performers. So Yo-Yo Ma did one, somebody else did one, somebody else did one. So it just showed there's not a lot of thought behind this when they're doing that kind of thing. I recently tested it with Christmas music, because I've been writing about Christmas music lately, and it was the same kind of thing. You'd pick a root track like Bing Crosby's White Christmas. If you do that on Pandora, you're going to get Sinatra and the Rat Pack and all those people, and Ella, and kind of people within that 10 to 15 to 20 year time period. Very traditional, your parents are going to like it kind of holiday music. You do that with iTunes Radio, And you might get within 10 songs 3 or 4 holiday songs within that time period, but then it's just grabbing any greatest hit by Andy Williams. And like, oh, well, you asked for a Bing Crosby song, so therefore you're going to want Andy Williams. Well, no, what I want is traditional holiday music, and that's why I picked that track, and that's why I picked that artist to do it. So at this point, Apple's got a lot of work to do, but they haven't been at it nearly as long as Pandora does. I think the advantage that Apple may have if they put the effort into this, and I don't know if they're going to or not, is that they have a much bigger catalog or potential catalog than does Pandora. Pandora's catalog is, compared to the other services, kind of limited. I think you've got I don't know what the number is, but it's in the hundreds of thousands versus the millions. Apple could get into the millions, but it really is going to take a serious effort on their part to make this intelligent, at least as intelligent as Pandora, at which point I'm going to switch over. Right now, I put it on to do some research, but I wouldn't listen to it routinely because it's just so far off the mark.
Interesting. Chris, do you think there's any backside motivation on what gets played as far as actually selling you the track? Since you can't control what comes up on iTunes Radio.
I don't think, I mean, Apple's never seemed to me like it's sort of in the payola business, which is that they're trying to, and I'm not saying that you're saying that.
Yeah, I don't, because I guess I wasn't even. It's really interesting you said that. I wasn't even thinking about it. That okay, I slip them, a couple $100 and I get more plays. I'm thinking about the fact that they get a cut of the music they play. Excuse me, they get a cut of the music they sell. So
right. Therefore,
are they going to try to play things that they think will sell better, in hopes of encouraging those sales?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how much money they actually make on the iTunes store. For years, Phil Schiller would come out and he'd say, no, we're only doing this to feed our hardware. And that may still be the case. I know they make money. Apple has said, yeah, we're actually making money from the iTunes store now. They haven't said how much. I think they must be making a decent amount of money from it. But, in Apple's world, when you're talking about profits in the billions and billions, maybe making 50 million on an iTunes store, maybe that's not a big deal to them. I do think that for their playlists, they want to give you what you want to hear. So, of course, they're going to put in the best tracks that they can find. They're not going to put junk in there. And I think that the studios are probably going to be more supportive the more songs that Apple sells, because that's the point. That's why they would open up their catalogs, right? Pandora you can purchase as well, but it's really a lumpy process that if you're using like an iOS device, there will be a buy button there, but then it takes you to the iTunes store, and it's not very convenient to do it that way. The iTunes Radio thing makes so much more sense because there's a buy button right there when the song is playing, so you can just get it immediately, which I think is why the studios would be more interested and the labels would be more interested in selling through iTunes Radio versus Pandora. But does Apple want you to buy this stuff? Probably. But I think there's an integrity within their music division where they really want to kind of deliver stuff that you're going to like. And maybe for them, more interesting still is selling advertising. And not all of us have iTunes Match. So if you have iTunes Match, you don't hear the ads. But otherwise, the vast majority of people don't have iTunes Match. And so maybe Apple's big revenue is coming from advertising, in which case Apple just wants you there to be listening so that you can hear those ads. And
to your point, then that would indicate they would do a better job or want to do a better job of giving you what you want.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And plus, I don't think Apple ever wants to go in half-baked on something. Sometimes they do. I think iTunes Radio, in terms of these root track stations, is half-baked. I think it's a quarter-baked. I think it's pretty bad. But I don't think they want to be embarrassed. They don't want to be known as the company that can't do this. Although, you look at iTunes Ping.
You read my mind.
And there was, again, something like, hey, we're going to do this. And it was very much unlike Apple, where they threw something against the wall and then it was bad. They probably knew it was bad and they couldn't get it done, where they weren't willing to put the resources into it. hopefully this is more important to them, that they're going to understand it's going to be a more attractive service to people, and therefore they're going to make more advertising money, and they're going to sell more tracks and, sell more devices because of it, that they're going to work very hard on this. I hope so, because I would like to see competition to Pandora that's as good as Pandora. But again, Apple's got a long way to go.
Yeah, and I brought the whole thing up because, of course, Pandora, when they started, I think at the very beginning, you didn't have the option to buy the track. And, it was much more of a pure service. And then as they grew and matured and had to get funding, they had to adopt things like advertising and some of that. So that's sort of why I wondered if you felt that way. And I'm glad to hear, because you're right. Ping, I don't know if it was a case of lack of resources or just an ill-conceived notion. Because it's an interesting point. There are times that there are people that I'm curious about what they're listening to, but very, very seldom am I going to, with all due respect to you, Chris, I'm not going to listen to follow you socially to figure out what music you're listening to.
What?
I seriously doubt you would follow me to find out what music I'm listening to.
Oh, I already know what you listen to, so there's no reason to.
Thanks a lot.
No, it's because it's easy, because you listen to a genre of music that I don't care for.
Well, I listen primarily, I listen heavily to a genre of music you don't care for, but there are also some things that I might shock you. Who knows?
No, actually, I think at one time for somebody, we published our list of concerts that we'd seen, like top 50 concerts or something, or artists we'd seen. And there were a couple there that I was surprised you'd gone to. McKenna. What's her?
Yeah, Lorena McKenna.
Yeah, and I like her a lot. Yeah. But I thought that was very unusual to see her name on your list, because I don't know, maybe you'd been drinking and we're in Vegas, and that was the one ticket you got. But
no, actually, she came to Harrisburg, and it was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic.
I've heard recordings of her shows. I think I've never seen her, but boy, it sounded good.
Go if you get the chance.
I will. So if you're listening, Lorena, please make your way to California, and I'll come see, based on Chuck's recommendation. Yeah. We were talking about something else before.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I took us off. Oh, the social thing. The social thing. Following back and forth.
Yeah. With Ping, I think the social thing makes sense given the right kind of service. iTunes is not the right kind of service, in that it's a purchase service. So I think Apple was trying to find some other way to advertise music and say, well, here, we'll get people to, recommend music. But that kind of service could work really well for a subscription service where you'll be able to stream anything. Because at that point, like Spotify, you could send a playlist to your buddy and say, these are the top 10 tracks that I'm listening to that I think are great. Listen. And then you can listen to all 10 of them, and you can rearrange it, and you can add to the playlist and then send it back to your buddy. So as I did when I was a teenager, I would go over to a friend's house with an armful of albums that he didn't have. And we'd put them on, and we'd sit around and go, that's very deep. And that's some of the junk that's back there. And but I think that experience of sharing music with friends is wonderful, because you find this connection, as you and I have, with Lorena McKenna, which was unexpected, which makes me like you even more than I already do.
Thank you.
And no, it does, because it sort of gives you an insight into somebody's personality, because music is such a personal thing that when you find people who like artists that you do, and you suspect for the same kind of reason, it's like, oh, you hidden depths. I had no idea. And much like when I think people have met you and for years and years at Expo and around, and knew you from in the industry, and then find out that you're a metalhead. Is shocking to everybody who doesn't know, because I look at you've got a very nice tie on, and you look like a very respectable person, and yet the kind of music you listen to is like, wow, that's really interesting. That's a side of Chuck that I wouldn't have imagined. So anyway, this whole idea of sharing music via playlists and recommendations, I think is great. I love the fact that Spotify does it and some of the other services do it, but it doesn't really work at a store when you have to go and buy that stuff or listen to 90-second previews. I mean, it's not the same. It's like making mixtapes from the old days, where I would make a tape for somebody, and the sequencing was really important, and the gap you put between each track was really important. with paid for music, no, it doesn't work.
That just brought to mind rip, mix, and burn. You remember the Apple's, take your CDs and rip them and then mix them up and then burn a whole new playlist or set to then a CD. Interesting.
Yeah.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, well, it's the way. I mean, you could kind of see some of the trends of Apple, and you can guess at some of the people making decisions at their age, because they occasionally do things that go, oh, yeah, well, okay, you've got to be 40 and older, because this is not something a 20-year-old would do, unless they're very forward-thinking. I think one thing that Apple did do is they glommed onto the idea of the playlist as unit rather than the album. When Steve Jobs was talking about iTunes, he really was, I mean, he was a guy my age, so he was really thinking about albums, and he'd often refer to things that way. But he got the idea. I think somebody talked to him about it and said, think about mixtapes, think about playlists. And that's where they moved, and that's what the unit is now. It's the playlist, it's not the album. When I talked to my daughter about music, I think she was listening to the new Katy Perry song, and because we have streaming services, I put on the album, and we're playing through it. She goes, "I've never heard this before." I said, "Well, it's on the new Katy Perry album. Of course you've heard it." Goes, "No, I only listened to cut 3, 6, and 9 on there," and she hadn't heard the old album because. And I said, "Well, don't you ever listen to albums?" No. Why would I do that? Yeah. And so, for me, coming from an album background, it's like, well, why wouldn't you do that? I mean, it's sort of the whole artist's vision, right? And she goes, no, it's about the song, stupid.
It's all about me, stupid.
Well, yeah, I mean, but that's it. It's about the song now. It's not about the album, going back to what we were talking about originally. So it's a different perspective.
But Chris, didn't you, and I'm dead serious now, I'm having fun with you, but it's true. There were always tracks you didn't care for. Didn't you pick the needle up and, drop it into the next track?
It depended on what condition I was in when I was listening to the music.
I see.
No, and I don't mean it that way.
Oh.
Well, maybe I do. But, I would listen to different kinds of music at different times of day. And a turntable is far less convenient than the stuff we have today. So to go over and pick up, I sort of wish that there was a tool like a 6-penny nail that you could just kind of scratch through the vinyl where it would just go and go to that track. So you would never, ever, ever have to hear this one particular track. But, some artists would be kind enough, knowing that the really crap track was the last one on the side A. And so it would allow you to go up and pick up the needle and then flip the album over and then put it back down again. So you didn't have to sit through, let's see, there was a Simon and Garfunkel track on, I can't remember the album, but it was their high concept piece where they had some radio announcer talking about nuclear war and, Vietnam and this, that, and the other. And then they're singing some pretty little song there. And it was like, this is a real downer, guys. I kind of just wanted to tune in for the harmonies, and I don't need the social commentary very much. So if you could just, and that, so yeah.
I give you credit. I'd never even considered the possibility of that 6-penny nail scratch to advance the track.
Well, I knew it would just damage my needle, and everybody was poor in those days, so I didn't want to go out and have to buy a new cartridge. But I really thought, wow, I so wish this song wasn't on here. But you kind of again, that was sort of the album. You just put up with it, or you left the room, or you found something else to do when that track was playing.
Yeah. Chris, what's your take on the current state of the pay for music services? And I'm thinking Spotify, Rhapsody, and I know there are others out there, Google Play. One thing, I've experimented with all of them. I've sort of backed away from all of them for a couple reasons, not the least of which is I have an extensive collection of music I really like, and so I'd rather spend my time, unless I'm in discovery mode with Pandora, like we were talking about. I want to kind of listen to what I want to listen to. But I've been very disappointed to find that some real gaps in each one of them, and sometimes different gaps in them. Certain albums are missing, and certain albums I really, really like. They may not be the band's most popular, but I really enjoyed that album. And so it's caused me to unsubscribe from a couple of them because I just, I'm not going to say it's a waste of time, but if those things are missing, how many other things are missing? And I'm not going to take the time to go through and, compare my personal catalog to what's there to stream. I'm just going to go to my personal catalog and call it a day.
Yeah. I have subscriptions to all of them, and I pay for all of them. I'm thinking of getting rid of some of them because it's kind of dumb because I don't listen to all of them all the time. But I have Sonos stuff around my house, and that makes subscription services so much more valuable because wherever you are, you can call up a service and you can either play a channel by a particular artist, much like a Pandora sort of thing, or you can go and pick certain albums that you want to listen to or songs you want to listen to or genres. I prefer Rhapsody, and I have for a long time. I've used all of them, and again, I pay for all of them. I like Rhapsody because I like the depth of its catalog, so it's exactly what you're talking about. I am far less frustrated with Rhapsody than I am other services where I'm looking for something. Most of the time, Rhapsody has it. Their classical catalog is quite deep, and I'm really happy about that because it's a drag when somebody has a great pop catalog, and that's fine, or hip hop or soul, and I listen to that stuff. But I also listen to a lot of classical music because I'm trying to discover more of it. And when you have these big gaps, or you have a recording by just one orchestra instead of 12, it makes a difference. And the same with jazz. So I find that overall, Rhapsody's catalog seems to be more complete than Spotify's or Mog or Rdio or Slacker. Also, Rhapsody's radio stations are better. They started with this whole idea of this sort of Pandora radio or based on artist stuff before some of the other services did. So I think they have a jump on them. If I want to listen to genres of music, they have some, 30 or 40 of these things, or maybe more. Where if I want to look for a particular kind of jazz, for example, they have a station that is just Pacific Coast jazz from the 50s and 60s, which is sort of a really odd subgenre, but some really great stuff. And you kind of find that scattered all over their catalog, where you can get in and hear some very interesting stuff that you wouldn't normally find. So in terms of just broad discovery, I think Rhapsody's got it. Spotify has some other great stuff. Their social stuff is very good. They have links out to other services that are quite good. So if you want Rolling Stones top playlists, you can get those. I'm not a Facebook guy, but if I were, they have a lot of nice hooks into Facebook as well. So it's easier to share music with your friends that way. Pandora, I still go to, again, more than I go to iTunes Radio for certain things. My holiday stuff, they have a classical holiday station, which is quite good. So, I think I generally bounce between Spotify, Rhapsody, and Pandora for what I listen to. And I occasionally listen to stuff in my own library. I have a fairly extensive library, but again, it's so much easier to pull it up on one of the services instead of having to have a computer running and get it that way.
Yeah, that's an interesting statement. There is a convenience factor. There's no question about it. You think of a song and you can jump to it pretty quickly instead of having to go over to iTunes and try to find it, assuming you own it. So, yeah. Yeah,
although I put my iTunes catalog on a NAS, which is, and I can access that through Sonos, which is a huge help because instead of, I keep my music library on attached. Well, normally I would have kept it on a Mac Pro. So you don't want to leave a Mac Pro running all night just so you can listen to an album. The energy costs alone are horrible. So instead, I can just have a little NAS running, and that's got all my music on it. It's accessible via Sonos, so I can get to it that way.
Yeah, I've recently made that same change, and the Sonos part, yeah. But I did want to point out too, Sonos, at least the last time I looked, well, depending on your perspective, Sonos doesn't support Google Play, or Google Play doesn't support Sonos. At least, again, as far as I know. And that was one of the reasons I dropped Google Play, because it's like, well, I want to pump this out and I can't, and that's no good.
Yeah, I don't know I'm sure that Sonos would be happy to have Google Play on there. Sonos seems to be very embracing of any music service that comes along. So I think it's really up to Sonos just saying, you want in? And they say yes or no. I mean, iTunes Radio is not on there, and I doubt that they ever will be. Yeah, and Google may feel the same way, is that they want to direct people to Google hardware. Get your Google Chrome this or that, and play it through our stuff. Because they're trying to do this, the media thing as well. So maybe they feel like hanging on to that. But in some cases, I think Google Play is sort of like a Me Too effort, that they say, yeah, well, we have that too. So, and we've got the same catalog of 15 million tracks. So why wouldn't you want to get it this way? And I think so much of it is about the hardware. If you don't want to sit in front of your computer and listen to music that way. So again, a system like Sonos. And I think that's one reason, not only the quality of their gear that gives Sonos an advantage, but the fact that they do have access to all these services.
Okay, tell us the truth. How many Sonos components are in your home?
Let me count. Let's see. There's. I'm not going to count bridges because they don't make noise. Yeah. So okay. So 7.
Wow. Okay. Then I have.
But some of them are paired. So
yeah,
they operate as one.
I have ways to catch up with you then.
Yeah. What I don't have a play bar. I don't have the subwoofer. And I don't have a Play 1, but I have 2 Play 3s, 2 Play 5s, the amp, and the non-amp, and then something else.
Well, I know the argument is they're expensive, but the argument for is that it's super convenient, and it makes music suddenly so much more accessible to you.
Oh, it completely changes the way I listen to music entirely. Yeah. Entirely. So I have not regretted that purchase for a second, particularly because my daughter has one in her room. And so she can listen to all the stuff she wants in her room and close the door, and I don't have to listen to it.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you, Chris, for sharing this discussion. It's fun. I still feel like that this is an evolving world. I think we're still trying to figure out. The artists are trying to figure it out. The labels are trying to figure it out. We as consumers are trying to figure out how we want to do it, and almost what we want and how we want it.
Yeah, and artists are doing some interesting things, though, and I'm glad to see them getting some more power in this. A lot of artists are doing Kickstarter-like things. There's an artist I like a lot, a guy named Blue, Bleu, who did a Kickstarter project, I think it was about 3 years ago, to finance his album. And I think he was asking for, 5,000 or something. He got 40,000 because his fans supported him. And I like to see artists doing this thing, and you're seeing more and more of them. And they're not just kind of small-time artists. Some of the big-time artists are really taking this seriously now. And I interviewed a band called Moe, M-O-E, a couple of years ago at Expo, and they're all about performance and about selling the MP3s off the soundboard at the end of the show. And I think that's terrific. I really like to see artists controlling their destiny rather than labels doing it for them or to them. So good for them, and I hope we continue to see that kind of trend.
You just punched my button, and I've got to ask, do you think that MP3 soundboard files, I was about to say tapes, files, do you think they detract from selling music? The studio recorded music? Because I don't. And I think the Grateful Dead are a perfect example, and I'm not even a Deadhead, but I think it's a great example.
Yeah, well, I think it's for the fans. Most people are not going to spend $10 for a show or even $5 for a show unless they're a fan. If you're a Fish follower, for example, yeah, you're going to spend a lot of money on Fish shows because they're all different and they're always doing something. And you've got to, I think having soundboard recordings and paying the artist directly for these things gives you more of a stake in that artist's future. There are artists that I followed around for years, and I would buy anything they did and any album that they appeared on just because I sort of felt grateful to them for providing me with so much pleasure. And I would buy something, and maybe it was a bad album, but I would continue buying, 3, 4, 5 albums later to see if this was just, they were having a bad year, or if it turns out, yeah, they've kind of exhausted the message that I'm interested in hearing. So I do think the soundboard recordings are good for the fans. In terms of detracting otherwise, no, I don't think so. Regular people will continue to buy the hits and the albums and won't be interested in soundboard recordings because it's too raw, and they don't want to hear that from the artist. They want something that's really polished. Whereas other people, anything that the artist does, they're going to invest in.
Well, again, we're back to that emotional reaction. If I've gone to a show of any kind, I don't care if it's a small club or an arena, and I've had that emotional, visceral reaction that I was looking for, then I'm going to purchase that in the hopes of at least maybe not recreating it, but reminding myself of just what a great time I had, and the fact that it was an emotional investment of some kind.
That can work depending on what you hear later, because part of the show is, it's so much about the experience of of being in the crowd and the sound system around you and the mood you're in and what's happening on stage. Sometimes when you listen to a recording of something and it hasn't been sweetened in any way, you realize, wow, that was really out of tune, or the singer didn't do that. I saw some of the I think the YouTube tapes that came out of the Led Zeppelin reunion thing that they did in London. And not only did they have to move some of the keys down because, he just couldn't sing those anymore, but some of the singing was just way off. Now, I think if I were in the room, I would have thought that was the most awesome experience of my entire life. But having seen it, not having been in the room and then listened to it later, gone, whoa, that,
Yeah,
Bob Plant, you were great in the day, but you don't have that range anymore. Right. Whereas I can hear actually, I heard a soundboard recording of a McCartney show, and he can still hit those notes. So in some cases you go, wow, this guy has still got it. And other people you go, yeah, it was a good show, but I don't need to relive it that way, because it detracts from the original experience.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point, because, having listened to soundboard recordings, you're right. Sometimes you think, I don't remember it sounding like that.
No, because it didn't, because they had that nice sound reinforcement in the room that made you go, oh, and maybe they put a little sweetening on the vocals that isn't coming through the soundboard. And so you're getting really a much rawer performance. But on the other hand, in the case of some of these recordings, the artistry is so good, or the technique is so good. You don't have to worry about, the fact that it's not polished so much, but wow, listen to that. Listen to what that person just did. I mean, it's like watching, the highest quality gymnastics in the world, what some people are able to do with musical instruments or with their voice. And for that reason alone, sometimes you just have to be in awe of what people are capable of doing live and in front of you under pressure, where they can't stop and say, oops, let me try that again. There's no editing. It's just go.
Yeah. Chris, we have to do this again. This was fun.
I thought so too.
I don't know if we solved anything, but it was still fun.
It's all solved.
Yeah, okay,
yeah.
Good.
We're done.
Good. Okay, folks, go back and listen to it again, and you can take notes on what was solved.
Listen to the soundboard recording of this, because it's a little raw, but all the good stuff is still there.
Yeah, we'll be selling it right after the show. Chris, if I don't talk to you, have a great holiday. Thanks so much for the time.
All right, thanks, Chuck.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. We'll have links in the show notes to everything Chris and I talked about. If we talked about anything that you really want to go back, or maybe we'll have links to the soundboard recording. Who knows? Until the next time, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, app.net, Google+, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the Mac Voices Dispatch, to stay up to date with all the latest Mac Voices news from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com.